A history of Sharpies. In the early 19th century, New Haven, Connecticut, nestled along the northern shore of Long Island Sound, was a burgeoning center of marine activity. The city's proximity to rich oyster beds made it a focal point for the oyster industry, which had been a staple of the local economy since colonial times. By the mid 19th century, the oyster industry in New Haven, especially in the neighborhood of Fairhaven, had grown rapidly. The shallow, protected waters of Long Island Sound provided excellent conditions for oyster beds, and the demand for oysters up and down the East Coast supported a thriving local economy. To meet the needs of this growing industry, local boat builders developed practical, shallow draft vessels suited for the job. The Sharpie became quickly the preferred boat for oystermen in the area. Its flat bottom, straight sides, and centerboard made it ideal for working in shallow water. It was easy to build, affordable, and could be operated by just one or two people. By the 1880s, over 200 Sharpies were in use along the wharves of Fairhaven, reflecting the scale of the trade and the efficiency of the design. Around that same time, in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, a different town with a similar name, Joshua Slocum was undertaking a project that would later become famous. In 1891, he rebuilt an oyster sloop named the Spray in a friend's backyard pasture. Originally also used in the oyster trade, the boat had fallen into disrepair. Slocum spent over a year rebuilding her by hand, eventually setting sail in 1895 on the first solo voyage around the world. Although the Spray was not a Sharpie, her background as a working boat built for shallow coastal use reflects the same traditions of utility and economy. Slocum's journey showed that with skill and care, even a simple oyster boat could be turned into a seaworthy world cruiser. A major innovation came in the form of the centerboard, a retractable keel that could be lowered or raised. In 1811, a U.S. patent was filed and granted to three brothers in Cape May, New Jersey. This allowed boats to maintain a shallow draft while still benefiting from the lateral resistance needed for effective sailing upwind. The centerboard became a defining feature of Sharpies, enabling them to operate efficiently in the shallow oyster beds of Long Island Sound, but also far beyond. Before the Sharpie, watermen relied on simple vessels. Dugout canoes, made by hollowing out large tree trunks, were among the earliest forms of watercraft used by Native Americans and settlers. They lacked the capacity and the stability needed for commercial oystering. By the 19th century, the concept of the sailing canoe had gained popularity. The early canoes prioritized speed and ease of movement. Slender hulls reduced resistance, while their shallow drafts allowed them to access remote shoal water. However, the extremely narrow beam limited stability, especially under sail, leading to adaptations such as outriggers or broader hull forms in later vessels like the Sharpie. The catboat, which emerged along the eastern seaboard in the early 19th century, provided a different model. They were designed for both work and pleasure, and were characterized this time by wide beams and shallow drafts, and a single centrally located mast, usually gaff rigged, and carried well forward in the boat, almost on the bow. This made them easy to manage and ideal for fishing and day sailing. The beam of a catboat is often measured close to half its length, providing substantial stability in a very roomy cockpit or small cabin. The hulls are gently rounded, giving them an excellent capacity for shallow water use. However, the forward mast placement could result in poor downwind handling and a bit of weather hum, especially in gusty conditions. Despite these drawbacks, catboats are widely appreciated for their robust construction and user friendly design. Many watermen see in them the durability and simplicity required for working in the inshore fisheries of the Northeast, and they are still popular today. Another flat bottom boat was already hard at work in the harbors and rivers of America, the scow. Much less elegant, the scow was a vital part of the same lineage. The scow had a focus on maximum cargo capacity rather than speed. The Sharpies are narrow and swift. Scows are broad and square ended, blunt at the front and the back. This optimized the size for carrying bulk goods. Scows also have a hard chine and a flat bottom. They're made with straight planks and are relatively easy to build and maintain. Many scows were built with sailing rigs, either gaffed or sprit sails fitted with centerboards or leeboards, used mostly for ferrying goods. Some were unrigged and used as lighters, dredges, even floating warehouses. Both types of boat were usually owner built using local materials and saw regional variation depending on the waters they worked. Sharpies were workboats that flirted with yacht like aesthetic. Scows were never romanticized, even in their own time. They were the blue collar haulers of the maritime world, broad, blunt, and built for work. In 1848, James Goodsale of Fairhaven claimed to have built the first Sharpie with his brother. What set the Sharpie apart was again its uniquely flat bottom, hard chines, and narrow beam. Features drawn from the dugout canoes and refined with elements from the catboat and other working boats of New England. The Sharpie was tailor made for oyster harvesting, cheap, easy, and could work in waters just a foot deep. They typically carried either a single or a catch rig, unstayed masts, leg of mutton sails, and sprit booms. The sails could be reefed quickly, the rig was easy to repair, and the boat could be operated by one or two crew. The addition of the centerboard gives them acceptable windward ability for short coastal passages. You can get back home in a Sharpie. The construction of the Sharpie is simple and performance based. One of the defining traits was that it's fast and inexpensive. Unlike rounded hulls of traditional catboats, which require steam bent frames, lofting, and careful shaping, Sharpies were built using flat planks joined along hard chines. This method, known as chine construction, allows Sharpies to be built on the ground or even upside down using basic carpentry skills and fewer tools. The hull sides were typically straight and flaring, meeting at a flat bottom at an angular joint. A single chine on each side gave the Sharpie its distinctive boxy cross section. By the mid 19th century, the Sharpie had firmly established itself in the oystering grounds of Long Island. Its practical design proved so adaptable that it began quickly migrating southward. In the Chesapeake Bay, watermen quickly realized the utility of the Sharpie's basic form. Though multi-log planked sailing canoes and sailing scows were already in use, the Sharpie offered a new model. The influence is clearest in the Chesapeake Flattie, a direct local adaptation of the New England Sharpie. These boats retained the Sharpie's flat bottom and centerboard, but were made much heavier and wider to better handle the bay's chop and to carry larger oyster loads. The Flattie's rig was often instead a simple gaff sloop. The bug-eye, while an evolutionary leap from the unique Chesapeake Bay multi-log sailing canoes, also shows traces of Sharpie logic. Though built to be heavier, larger, more robust, and suited for oyster dredging, the bug-eye retained the shallow draft and stable platform proven in Sharpie operations. The Sharpie's influence becomes most apparent in the design of the skipjack, the last commercial sailing vessel in America and a Chesapeake icon. Developed in the late 19th century in response to Maryland laws requiring sail power for dredging, the skipjack was effectively a Sharpie crossed with a bug-eye. The Sharpie continued farther south through the inshore waters of the Carolinas and all the way to the Gulf Coast, and it found a perfect home in South Florida. In 1881, Commodore Ralph Monroe brought a 33-foot New Haven-style Sharpie to the waters of Biscayne Bay, Florida. He sailed all the way down from New England, and the boat served him well, but he soon realized that Florida's conditions demanded something sturdier and more versatile. He designed and built Egret, a double-ended 28-foot Sharpie with flared sides and more freeboard. She could carry people, supplies, mail, floated in 8 inches in water, and had a high stern and bow, allowing it to ride safely in rough seas. He described it as the Sharpie lifeboat. He became a fixture on Biscayne Bay, and the Egret soon went on to influence later builders across the Gulf and the Caribbean. His home and yacht club in Coconut Grove still stand today, and the Egret is still commonly built and is a heavy influence on modern Sharpies, which have become very popular with the use of plywood as cheap amateur cruising vessels. Hear more in episode 2 coming later.